So I recently acquired SlimeVR trackers, and I've had Vive 2.0s for a good amount of time. They have served me well. But if you've watched my VR chat streams in the past few months or so, I've been complaining a lot about my Vive trackers and the limitations of them, especially since they rely on base stations, and of course they have dongles that you have to put into a USB hub in order to act like you got all these different parts in order to ensure they receive tracking. And of course, many things can go wrong with both, like having to rely on dongles and a USB hub, having to rely on base stations, which, you know, things can get in the way or obscure, depending on like what you're using the trackers for, whether you're like dancing or trying to lay down or using it for certain positions. So it's more limited in that way. And I don't know, I've been having issues with the 2.0s getting like, I get the stanky leg or they lose tracking and I have to like try and fix them, and I get frustrated and I just turn them off and just use VR chat as normal. So in the past month or so, I had a friend help me out get the SlimeVR trackers, and of course it's going through like a crowdfunding thing. Like, there was a Kickstarter for the SlimeVR trackers a long time ago, and they're still sending out shipments. So mine finally came to me, and I went through. It was a little bit of a hassle to set them up. It's a little, depending on what source you're going through to help set them up. It's a bit of a hassle depending on like what setup you have, because they are Wi-Fi based trackers. They're not tied to the base stations, but there's a lot of benefits to that. And I want to show, like, I just want to do a video where I compare the movement of me having the SlimeVR trackers, and of course, the very first night when I got those set up and I was testing them out, I did like some videos where I'm dancing with different avatars in the SlimeVR trackers, so I'm going to show a little like montage of that as well. So I have my Vive trackers on, my Vive 2.0 trackers now. I've had these since, I think, 2022. So I've had them for a while and never got around to upgrading to the 3.0s. And there's the Vive Ultra trackers, which I think have their own cameras, so they're not like, I don't think they're relying on base stations. But the ones that I have are the old Vive trackers, and they rely on base stations. And of course, the issue with that compared to the SlimeVR trackers is that they can get easily obscured by objects or other things that might interfere with the base stations. So I have them on right now. I guess I'll sort of demonstrate the movement with the Vive trackers and compare them with the SlimeVR trackers that I have now. But I only have 3 Vive trackers. I never got any more than just 3, but I have ones for the feet, to go on the feet, and then I have one that goes on the waist here, and I can kind of like do like that to jiggle it. One thing I've always noticed about the Vive trackers, and maybe it's the way I have them secure, the fact that these are the way they're secured on the straps is through a swivel, but they will gradually come undone from the swivel with time, so I've like swiveled them back, and then they can be a little more jittery. I found out with the movement, not quite as smooth compared to the SlimeVR trackers, in my opinion. So doing certain movements feels a little bit more jerky. I'm sure in the past, like, of course, VR chat itself does its own, like, you can calibrate stuff through VR chat as well, and it does its own calculations, but yeah, just having these are definitely, they're definitely more wobbly. Like, see if I move my feet around, it's not too bad, but depending on the movements here, let's see if I can sit down. Now, one thing I've noticed, and I'm going to have to figure out, is depending on the movements, either the Vive 2.0 trackers can be better, or the SlimeVR trackers can be better. And I'm still learning the SlimeVR trackers, but see, if I get down like this, I feel like with the Vive 2.0s, they're not too bad with kneeling movements, but you notice if I do like this, they kind of, the recovery when standing up isn't so great, because you notice they kind of like pop in and out to like recalculate. And for laying down, I actually have a futon over here. Maybe I should actually lay on some furniture here. Yeah, for laying down, these aren't too bad, of course, as long as they're in view of the base stations, but the only issue with them is if you put a blanket on, which I will demonstrate. Okay, so the blanket's gonna go on, and I'll see how well these track with the blanket. Yeah, see, it actually, if you notice, I have the blanket on, and what it does, and I think this is through VR chat, is when you can set this up through VR chat, but if you lose tracking, it'll like sort of lock your position in place, but I can't actually move my legs now. They're stuck in place. Like if I do this, you notice they're completely locked where they are because I put a blanket on me, and that obscures the Vive trackers, the ones that actually rely on base stations. And if I put, let's see, yeah, my hips can't even move either. I'm moving my hip tracker under the blanket, and yeah, that doesn't move either. So that's one of many advantages of the SlimeVR trackers, is they won't get obscured by a blanket. The Vives do, since they rely on a base station. And there you go. There's also they pop back in place because I just took the blanket off. Pretzeling is a very common occurrence. I don't know if I experienced it as much with the SlimeVR trackers, but pretzeling is something that happens a lot when I've used the Vive trackers. So sitting with the Vive tracker seems to be fine. I've had a bit more of an issue sitting with the SlimeVR trackers, and that just might be based on my calibration, so I'm still trying to learn how to use them. But, you know, as long as these aren't obscured, and they can, the base stations can see them, setting's fine with these. So far, you know, I can open and close legs, lift legs up and stuff. And then sit up here. Recovery from sitting up is pretty decent, but you notice there's, it's a little jerky. Yeah, there's some jerkiness there with what I have. Now, what about movements that require you to get on the floor? I think that's something that I've had an issue with Vive trackers, because certain positions, if you're doing certain positions like laying on the floor or certain exercises or whatever you're doing with the trackers, the base stations may not pick them up properly. So for example, I'm going to try to actually kneel, like actually on my floor. This is fine. This seems fine, but to a point, but you notice how my feet are sticking straight up there and not flat on the floor. And then I'm going to put my hands on the floor. The tracking, I have 2.0s, and the tracking for those aren't too bad to a point. So if I try and, I'm going to lay flat, and this is where it's not going to get me completely flat on the floor. I'm going to try and drag myself down. Yeah, you see now. And the issue with this is any position that's going to cover, like say if you have a tracker on the waist, and it's going to be obscured from the base station, that's not going to work. So at the moment, I'm laying flat on the floor, but you know, that's definitely an issue. And also one of my legs, yep, stanky leg. Stanky leg. Now the tracking to one of my legs is being lost. So I am gonna try this with I can still do stuff like this, because if I have my legs up, the base stations are gonna see my legs, and I'll get tracking that way. Now, what if I get on my back? How's that going to look with the Vive trackers, the 2.0s that I have? Let's see. Positions where you're on your back are mostly fine for the Vive trackers because, you know, you're usually going to be wearing them on the front, and that means they're not getting obscured, so that's completely fine. But if you're doing anything that's going to be like, you know, you have your back up and you have your waist to the floor, or, you know, if it's going to get covered, that's going to be a problem. So I'm going to turn around. I'm actually testing move around these this much because I've never actually tried to move this much with the Vive trackers. They're not bad though. You notice they kind of get a little bit out of alignment occasionally while I'm moving around. Yeah, so even with 2.0s, these aren't bad. They aren't 3.0s. They don't have the long battery life. You know, they rely on base stations, so... But I think, like... they're not the worst in the world. And I've gotten some very good use out of them over the years, but, given the space I have and having to be restricted to have them rely on the base stations, it's been kind of like... it gets kind of annoying and irritating, and, like, them having... I've had a lot of disconnect issues with these, because I have to have... these rely on dongles. I have to have all these, like, 3 different dongles that have to go in a USB hub, so I have to make sure the USB hub is in view of the trackers, and the base station is in view of the trackers. You got 2 things going on that you rely on to try and make sure the tracking is being picked up, and yeah, it can be... sometimes it can be a hassle. Sometimes, you notice there, see, the tracking of my leg gets a little sticky as well, so... Having something that relies on base stations is not the greatest in the world, so, you know, having more freedom with the Wi-Fi tracking, Wi-Fi-based tracking of the SlimeVR trackers is very helpful. That doesn't mean I'm going to get rid of my, I don't know what I'm going to do with my Vive 2.0 trackers, but, I could potentially, like, I've used them in combination with the SlimeVR trackers before, but the SlimeVR tracking, the measurements, the calculations that it does to compensate for where you don't have tracking at, like I have 5, so like for example I don't have a waist tracker, so it will try and calculate how the waist movement is, and that seems good enough to where I don't really need to wear the points there. I don't need to have like the Vive trackers in those areas. Now if the SlimeVR trackers serve me well enough over a good amount of time, I may consider getting more of the SlimeVR trackers so that I can have a proper waist tracker that's a SlimeVR one, and maybe elbows as well, so I can have proper arm movement, because at the moment this is not, you notice how I don't have any trackers on my arms, it's just the controllers of course, so I'm not getting like proper tracking of my arms being stretched out, so they're still bent here. So if I had trackers on like the elbows, then those might track properly. So one thing I like about these is they're very lightweight compared to the Vive 2.0s. And the movement does feel relatively smooth. Like once you get the calibration figured out, which can take a bit of work, but once you kind of know how to do it, then you're like, oh, it's not so bad getting it set up. So we'll do a few leg movements here. It feels more floaty, I guess. Maybe because it's just so lightweight, you know? And I've experienced less jittering and less, like, tracking cutting out with the SlimeVR trackers. So I'm going to actually attempt to sit and lay down with the SlimeVR trackers and then put a blanket over me to see how well they track. Because that's something I haven't tested yet. Since they aren't relying on base stations, then we'll see how well they track with a blanket over me. Okay, so... I will say I don't have a waist tracker, so this is going to be the only thing that is a disadvantage at the moment. Because I have a chest tracker, not a waist tracker. So whenever I sit down, it's going to try and calculate where my waist is, but not as accurately as the Vive 2.0 tracker that I have on my actual waist. I guess, I don't know if I can use I might be able to use the chest tracker to act as a waist tracker instead of being on the chest. But at the moment, the only thing that I notice some funk with these is just the sitting. But there might be a way to remedy that eventually if I get like an extension. Because they have an extension for the chest that goes down the waist so you can get the proper calculation. So it's not terrible. But that's the only thing that's going to be a little funky. So I'm going to have like, and then you notice here, it's a little weird, but it seems to work better if I actually like lay out instead of sitting down like this. If I'm actually like laying down, it doesn't seem as funky. So this is the only thing that I will have to remedy in the future. However, if you just look at it from here, it's not too bad. Yeah, so the leg movement, yeah, it's just so smooth. way smooth. So I have to sit up like this, lift my legs up. Also, the recovery from standing and sitting is pretty decent even compared to the Vive 2.0s that I have. They seem to correct themselves very smoothly. I haven't had any issues with that. So whether I'm laying down with the SlimeVR trackers or sitting, like the recovery between the positions is really good. So I'm going to attempt to lay down and then cover myself with a blanket now. Yeah, it's funny. Whenever I try to lay down when I have the Vive 2.0s, there's definitely some funk between standing and trying to actually go lay down, but this is pretty decent. You do notice though, because I don't have that waist tracker yet, you're gonna notice since I'm laying down, this does pop up a little bit. The waist kinda, if I move my head or my chest back and forth, you notice my legs are moving. So if I get a waist tracker extension, then that can definitely help with this. So I'm going to put a blanket over my legs and see how well this tracks. You'll have to just imagine that I'm putting a blanket over me. Alright, blanket is over my body. Let's see how well these track. Oh yeah. So when I do the Vive 2.0 comparison, the trackers will lock. They'll stop tracking when they have a blanket over. So yeah, look at this. Still tracking. And I have a blanket over me. That is amazing. I love it. That's great. Now, I will have to attempt... I don't know how well this is going to work compared to the Vives. But I'm going to attempt to do positions on the floor, because with the Vive 2.0 trackers, if I do position where my stomach or my waist is facing the floor, then the trackers will probably stop tracking or freak out or get a little funky, because that tracker on the waist is being obscured. So I'll try a position where I'm laying on the floor, laying like way down on the floor, kind of like this, but flatter. And then I'll try a position where I'm actually laying flat on my stomach, and then one where I'm on my knees to see how well that tracks with the SlimeVR trackers. And then let's see how this looks when I get up from laying down. So you notice my arms are popping out of place because I don't have SlimeVR trackers on my arms. So, you know, those are actually popping out. If I get SlimeVR trackers for these, the tracking will be better. But for my legs, going from laying down to moving the legs to going to standing, and you don't have that, like, it's not like popping into place. It's very smooth, which is great. Okay, so I'm going to attempt to kneel on the floor and see how well this goes. Everything seems to be good so far. Alright, so let's kneel. I'm very curious how it will track the feet. Okay. Let me lower myself on this floor, the VR floor. Here. Yeah, I notice the feet are flatter. So when I do this with the Vive 2.0 trackers, the feet will stick up in the back. So it's like at like an angle. But this is flat on the floor. Now the only thing, okay, yeah, so this probably will be a problem since I don't have a waist tracker. Since it's not getting the waist and I only have one on the chest, the tracking will not be ideal. So I bet if I get, I think I am. I like these so far. Getting a waist tracker so that I can do, get on the floor like this. In case you notice the tracking is a little bit funky. I'm gonna actually lay directly on the floor now. Let's see how... Well, it does track the feet way better, but that's because... compared to Vive 2.0's, but that's because I have trackers on the ankles and trackers on the thighs. Now, for the rest of me, because I only have that chest tracker, it's not gonna, I'm gonna be like this. So, definitely need, yeah, I definitely need that waist tracker if I want to get like the full effect, because otherwise, only the back of me is gonna look good. But it's a start. I think it's in the right direction. So if I can get maybe a few more slime trackers to cover, the upper body properly and the waist, I will be golden. Now let's see what the recovery's like from this. So I'm gonna get on my knees. What is it like to try and stand up after doing this? I wonder. I'm lowered into the floor. Let me get up here. What does this look like? Definitely less shaky than when I get up with the Vive 2.0's. Raise myself back up here. Space drag is really helpful for adjusting your body when you have FVT because, some things have colliders, some don't. Sometimes the colliders are in a funky position. Now, let's see how quickly. So I'm going to get down like this. Get up like this. So you sit down. Okay. Up. Yeah, recovery seems pretty decent. Now, occasionally, if I move too much, I eventually do have to recalibrate these, and they do get out of alignment eventually, but they're pretty decent so far. I'm liking these a lot. So what I'll do now is show kind of like I record a bunch of different videos of me dancing with different characters and showing like different dancing movements. So I hope you enjoyed watching the video, and me sharing my little experience with trying out the SlimeVR trackers versus the old Vives that I had. And I don't know if this would convince anyone to buy the SlimeVR trackers, but if you're kind of getting tired of something being tired of a base station, you want to try out something that's more like based on Wi-Fi and might allow for more freedom of movement. Maybe look into the SlimeVR trackers, give them a try, maybe do some research and see what others are saying about the trackers. I've got various friends, even before I got mine, that use the SlimeVR trackers, and I was recommended them as an alternative to the Vives that I had, and I've been enjoying them so far. And it'll be nice to gradually learn how to use them and make them like work really good over time. So see you later.